Did you know that most ancient people were illiterate? It's true. It's very difficult to be sure how many people in ancient cultures could read and write, but the best estimates put the rate at about 10% of the population of the Roman Empire in the 1st century. That is, only 1 person in 10 could read a book like the Gospel of Mark. Ancient cultures were what we call oral cultures. When it came to literature, they relied on their ears more than their eyes. And this means that most people encountered books not by reading them silently in their bedroom, alone as we might do, but by hearing them read publicly after a formal dinner at a friend's home, or in a gathering or assembly of some kind. This also means that ancient authors had to find ways of signposting the major developments in their story for listeners who could not see chapter markings or paragraph headings, but had to rely on the oral cues that the author had woven into his tale. A prime example of this in Mark's Gospel is what we call Markan sandwiches. These are places where Mark has taken 2 stories, split one of them in the middle, and inserted the second one into it. In chapter 5, the story of Jesus' healing of the woman with the flow of blood, 5:25-34, is placed in the middle of the story of the raising of Jairus' daughter, verses 21-24 and 35-43. In chapter 11, Mark flanks Jesus' cleansing of the temple, in verses 15-19, with the 2 halves of the story of the cursing of the fig tree, in verses 12-14 and 20-25. The point of doing this, of inserting one story into the middle of another, is to invite the reader to interpret the 2 stories in reference to each other. The role of faith is common to the 2 stories of Mark 5, and invites us to reflect on the ways in which that faith is manifest and depicted in each tale. In Mark 11, the fig tree symbolizes Israel, and the mountain is associated with the temple where Jesus performs his symbolic act of judgment. The 2 stories here need to be interpreted in reference to each other then. On several other occasions, Mark creates sandwiches of this kind as he tells the story of Jesus, and you'll see them if you read closely. There are many other literary devices that Mark uses to guide the listener's ear. Catchwords that link different passages together, type scenes that recur throughout the narrative, shifts in geography or time of day or time of year, and inclusios, where Mark frames a section of his gospel with very similar events, or statements meant to set off the intervening material as a discrete literary unit. One of the biggest examples of this is in chapter 8, verses 22-26, which forms a parallel or an inclusio with 10, 46-52. All of these literary techniques are meant to guide our ears through the transition in Mark's story, and to help us interpret each passage in relation to the wider narrative context. Did you know that Mark's entire gospel is organized in concentric fashion? The first part of Mark's gospel is called the prologue. This is verses 1-15, and it describes events that take place for the most part in the wilderness of Judea. The last part of Mark's gospel takes place at the tomb, where Jesus is buried and then raised from the dead. And these 2 passages correspond to each other as A and A prime. The Galilean ministry in chapters 1-8 corresponds to the Passion Week in Jerusalem in chapters 11-15. This is B and B prime. And the center of the gospel is the so-called way section of chapters 8-10, where repeated reference is made to Jesus traveling with his disciples on the way toward the final week of his ministry in Jerusalem. Linking these large narrative units are hinge passages that contain thematic links both to what has come before and to what follows in the next section. The 2 hinge passages at 8:22-26 and 10:46-52 actually form an inclusio around the central way section. Each passage reports the healing of a blind man, and together these accounts symbolize the blindness of the disciples and the healing nature of Jesus' teaching that he gives them. These 2 stories flank 8:27-10:45, where Mark collects a great deal of teaching from Jesus about the nature of discipleship and his expectations for the way his followers will live in relation to each other. This central section of Mark's whole gospel is itself very carefully organized around a triad of triads. This structural organization on the gospel really sets chapters 8-10 in relief. It beckons us, as listeners, to pay special attention to the things Jesus teaches in these chapters, because they're central to Mark's purposes in writing his gospel. We hope you enjoyed this brief glimpse into one of our courses at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. If you would like to learn more about the programs of study that we offer, please contact our admissions department by clicking the link below.